Hey, we're back, and hopefully we won't lose power today. Or again, I told my landlord, don't turn the AC on because we have really bad power here. So when you turn the AC on, it just everything goes off. So I told him I would be going back on to do a discussion on Cosmic Skeptic's video where he has the argument that objective morality is not possible. And of course, most people I've talked to so far vehemently disagree with him, including Dr. Alex Malpass, Rationality Rules, and a few other people. But what I thought was this actually go through Dr. Malpass's breakdown of this, because everything he said in there, I kind of, obviously agree with, and a lot of things I said prior to him writing this blog, I actually pointed out the video to him so he could write a blog or get his opinion on it. And he just has a much, obviously, hugely better way of articulating things than I could ever hope for, because he's just a master of this stuff. So I figured by going through his breakdown of Cosmic Skeptic's argument, then we won't have to actually watch the video. So I do recommend going and watch Cosmic Skeptic's video. And I want to make it very clear, I actually really like Alex, Cosmic Skeptic. I like his channel. I like the way he handles conversations. I think he's a brilliant interlocutor. I don't agree with him on a few things. But he does try to at least make an argument, and that you gotta appreciate. I mean, he does put himself out there. I think this particular argument he just makes is really, really, really bad, and he's really to take criticism on it. He even told me, he said, "Hey, Steve, why don't you email me on this and let me see your arguments against it?" And I said, "I'm more than happy to do that, but I'm gonna have a hangout on it first." He said, "Fine." And Rationality Rules is going to have a garden discussion with him on it as well. Another person who I think very, very highly of. Rationality Rules probably, I got to admit, I think the guy probably understands a lot of these nuanced arguments better than anybody I've ever met besides somebody like Alex Malpass. I mean, the guy, Rationality Rules, if you haven't subscribed to his channel, go check him out. The dude is just unreal at how good he understands these things. Although I don't agree with him on everything either, but you know what? That's philosophy, right? Everybody doesn't agree with everything. So anyways, I do have Ocean in here. I got Shannon back, and I got Cirrus. A few of them have not read Alex's blog yet, which is a shame because he has a wonderful blog called The Use of Reason. That's what we're going to be talking about. And if you haven't read it, the link is in the video description. Go check it out, and we'll be screen sharing this as we go along. So real quick, if you guys want to give a brief overview of what you thought of Cosmic Skeptic's argument, and then we can go right into Dr. Malpass's breakdown of it. What do you think? So, Ocean, you want to go first, or Skeptic? Cirrus?
I'll go first. I think
for the service. Yeah, go for it.
And it's been a little while since I watched the video, but when I watched the video, it seemed as though he very much tried to simplify concepts that are not entirely that simple. He tried to work them into black and white categories, and then say, well, it's more black than it is white, so it must de facto be black. Black being all morality is subjective to him. When it's not that way. And there's multiple theories of morality, even theistic theories of morality, that don't work in the way that he's describing them. For instance, divine command theory is ethical subjectivism, but it's objective to everybody it's passed down to. It is both. It's not just a strictly black and white issue, because it is contingent on the mind of the deity that's passing it down. And it seems to be that even in divine command theory, which is one of the hardest objective moral stances, still has a caveat for subjectivism. He doesn't realize that even though that is there and that is the case, he still wants to ascribe a black and white yes or no to the issue, even though it's a little more complicated than that. Even with the hardest stances, there's still a caveat for subjectivism. And in the hardest stances of subjectivism, there are still caveats made for an objective standard. I don't think it's a black and white issue, but that's how he wants to portray it.
Yeah, and it's funny because the very first thing I even told Rationality Rules was pretty much exactly what you just said. As far as I didn't coin it, but I used the phrase subjectivist reductionism. Is that what he's basically doing? Is he's boiling everything down to subjectivism, which doesn't work, and we'll explain why. And one thing it does, it confuses the belief with the belief content, and I think Alex Malpass brilliantly points that out. That everything can be broken down into some kind of reductionist approach, that everything's subjective, but that's not what the discussion really goes when we're talking about objective morality. Just because I can believe something about objective morality doesn't make the content of the objective morality true or not true. I mean, it's independent of that. That's what it means to be objective morality in this case. And I think he defines things differently a few times in his video. I think Cosmic Skeptic says objectivity means 2 or 3 different things in the same video. So it's really kind of confusing on that. So yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly in that, and I do think that he just boils it down to a subjective argument. But okay, Ocean, what do you think? Real quick.
The frustration that I had with Cosmic Skeptic's video was, is he was saying that it boils down to just God's opinion. When the definition of objective morality that I'm familiar with and I've used in conversations is, it's usually that morality is going to be a set of rules, even if there's no human minds. So God's mind not being a human mind, if it's God's opinion, then it still winds up being his objective morality. That being said, I think that he might be able to argue that the laws of the universe are subjective because God made them, and they're just God's opinions, even though he created the universe, using kind of his rule set.
Okay,
God damn it, I'm getting a phone call in the middle of this. But so if God creates the universe and he puts in like the moral law in his process of creating, and so that morality is then inherent in the universe that he's made, it's hard for me to imagine that wouldn't be objective. Like it seems like even if you have where the laws came from being from a designer, then that's his opinions. It's still going to be what it is outside of human minds.
right.
So it seems like he's equivocating on objective morality in that sense.
Yeah, a perfect example of that would be, we all, I think, would agree that objectively 1 + 1 = 2 in real analytics, right? That is an analytical fact, right? So if I even said, I don't believe that, I think 1 + 1 = 3, therefore there is no objective fact that 1 + 1 = 2, that's exactly what he's doing. He's saying that because people can have subjective values on a particular proposition, they can say, oh, well, I don't believe that proposition is true or false, or I believe that 1 + 1 = 3, that makes everything subjective. That's not how it works, right? Just because you can say 1 + 1 = 3 doesn't mean there's not an objective fact that analytically 1 + 1 = 2 in the reals base 10. And even 1 + 1 = 10 in binary still is the same thing as 1 + 1 = 2. It's just in a different base, but they represent the same number. So anyway, so Shannon, I know you haven't read Dr. Malpass's blog yet.
I've been perusing.
But you've been perusing.
Yeah, I'm perusing as well.
You want to give a brief thing, what you think so far, and then we'll get into it?
Well, I kind of mirror a bit of what Ocean was saying. I can't believe I'm agreeing with Ocean. What?
I know. What?
We agree a lot, Shannon. Don't start with me.
Okay, this is going
dude,
south
we
really
forgot about-
fast. We can't have this.
Yeah, right.
Steve, you are no stranger to that. Don't even.
I should be living in the south. Things go south so much for me.
Yeah. No. Well, I guess my primary thing with the video is I'm a moral subjectivist, or I'm starting to discover that I am as I'm delving a little bit more. But I understand the argument for moral objectivity when it looks like where he and I diverge is that he essentially decrees, like Ocean said, that God is subjective. It's his opinion, therefore it's subjective. But from a human perspective, from a Christian perspective, a Muslim perspective, a Jewish perspective, etc., if it's decreed to you, that's what makes it objective.
Mm-hmm.
It's objective because it's a mandate that's been dictated to you by the creator of the
Right.
Therefore, that it's an objective fact. Just like I exist is an objective fact because God created me, right? Like it's akin to that. It's on the same realm when you're looking at it from that perspective. Now, I don't agree that it's an objective fact because I don't believe that God exists and there's these moral mandates, but that's the argument he's making. The argument that he's making is that these moral mandates from a deity are subjective, and I think that's a leap.
Yeah, I think you're almost there. I do agree with you. I think there's things that need to be kind of sussed out on that, though.
Can I piggyback on that?
Yeah, let me just
Yeah,
piggyback
please.
real quick, and then I'll let you do it. I think Cosmic Skeptic initially in his video was saying that he's changed his position such that he used to think that subjectivism was what an atheist had to have. And then he thought that if you want to have an objective moral framework, moral objectivism. And by the way, if I use the term objectivism in this video, I am referring to moral objectivism and not Ayn Rand's objectivism, just for simplicity, so people know going ahead, because that term is conflated with Ayn Rand. Worst book I ever read, Atlas Shrugged. Don't do it. Oh, dude, you just don't.
Don't even.
You don't do it. Oh, it'll make it sends you into weird modes of reality. It's just so bad. But anyways, so he had changed his position such that he would think that only if you had the only way you can have an objective system is if you had a deity. And then his argument is now, even with a god, you can't have objective morality. So he went from saying atheists have to have subjective morality, which is wrong on the get-go. I know more atheists that subscribe to an objective moral framework than a subjective. But he also now is arguing that you cannot have an objective moral framework. So you are a subjectivist, but I don't think you would argue that you literally cannot have objective morals. You just don't believe they exist. There's a difference there. What position do you think you actually have? Are you saying that you just don't think objective morality exists, or are you going to go one step further like he does, which I think there's no possible way he can support, is that there are no such thing ever possible of objective morality?
See, if there is a deity, then I can see how objective morality could exist. I mean, this is a difficult thing for me to grapple with because I believe that morality is subjective.
Right, but
you kind of have to play devil's advocate because you're playing with a hypothetical here, and
I'm doing that as well.
Yeah, it seems almost as though he's trying to make it so that in all instances, no matter what realm you come from, no matter what way you look at it, morality is subjective, so that can strengthen the argument for subjective morality. And I don't necessarily think that's the appropriate tack.
You're exactly right.
He's essentially holding the impossibility of the contrary for subjective.
Exactly. If he makes it impossible for objective morality to exist at all, even if you have a theistic perspective, then you have no choice but to accept objective morality, and then there's a slippery slope from there. But that's, I mean, I'm on his team to a certain degree, but I don't think that's. I would rather the argument for, not how he's arguing. I can see how it could be compelling for people, but I can't jump on board because I can understand the argument for objective morality if you hold true that there's a deity.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with that. But I can actually make the argument that you can accept objective morality as an atheist easily. In fact, most atheist philosophers I know do probably accept objective morality. Yes, go ahead.
I want to piggyback. Okay, cool. So
get us on it, Ocean.
I want to piggyback so bad. So that I can piggyback.
I think that first I'm coming at this from like, not only am I moral subjectivist, but I'm like flat out anti-realist. So I'm definitely coming at it from a position of I don't think objective morality is a thing. But when looking at the argument to it, I see how it works, and the one way of like arguing for it by analogy could be gravity. Like if you look at how gravity works, we can tell that it works. We don't necessarily know why it works exactly the way that it does, why the numbers 2 and aren't like a little different. Mm-hmm. So from that perspective, when you're looking at morality, he asked a question in his video, why ought we be good? Yeah. Well, because goodness is inherently tied with oughts. So, we may not necessarily know why that is, but that doesn't mean that it isn't the case. That doesn't mean that morality isn't inherent in the universe just because you can't explain the crossing between the is-ought problem. Mm-hmm. So I think that's another place where he kind of screws up, where he's making an argument from ignorance in the middle of his video, where he makes the why ought we be good question. Just because it doesn't have an answer to that doesn't mean that you shouldn't ought be good. That's weird.
Yeah, no, and we're gonna get into that. Matter of fact, that's a whole different part of this discussion that we'll get into on his what you ought to do.
His whole thing hinges on is ought, though. Yeah. Where because there is no is ought answer. He doesn't say it like that, but the what it boils down to is because you don't have an answer to is ought, therefore it has to be subjective. And even if you have a morality independent of human minds, it's still subjective because we don't know why ought we be following those laws. And why ought gravity be the way that it is? That doesn't.
I said the exact same thing. I said the exact same thing to Dr. Malpass, right? I read it exactly as you did, and I said the same thing to Rationality Rules. However, I think Dr. Malpass makes a better argument, not for the is-ought, but something very related to the is-ought. It's called the naturalistic fallacy, right? Moore's naturalistic fallacy, and open argument.
I would agree with that too. That's a good
So I think that when we go down and we talk about this, we'll talk more about how good and defined non-naturalistically by Moore, which is a kind of a contradiction, because if Cosmic Skeptic is going to bring up the fact that he accepts non-naturalistic moral things like Moore does, then that's a moral realist position, actually. So he's using Moore for moral realism when he's trying to say that there are no objective facts, from more of a moral anti-realism position. By the way, you said you're a moral anti-realist. What position do you actually hold to for that? Are you a prescriptionist, emotivist, error theorist, or?
For me, I don't think that I've necessarily like picked a position as far as that's concerned. I just find
quasi-realism. We're putting in a quasi-realism.
I don't agree so far with any positions of objective morality that have been put down, and my perspective on that is that until really I see, like, until I agree with any of the premises of objective moral arguments, I'm going to hold that it's not a thing. My moral construction is more tied with my spiritual position of believing that moral rules and theories and so on are tied in with our evolution. They're also tied in with our responsibility as forming a society. It's in our hands what we want to do with that kind of stuff. And we have certain tendencies towards our evolutionary practices, or our evolutionary past, and our society building. Like,
no, I get that.
Myself
I totally get that. Yeah,
I don't know if that is
in
line with any of the theories that you were talking about. I haven't really investigated that front. I just don't agree with any of the premises of objective morality, so I can't hold it and I actively reject it because I disagree with those premises.
Yeah, I'm gonna put it in a quasi-realism. People ask my position. Look, I definitely think objective morality can exist, and I think that it probably does. I think there are objective moral facts. However, I happen to like error theory, and error theory is actually a more anti-realist position. And I'm not saying I advocate for it. I know Ozzy doesn't like more, or he doesn't subscribe to it. But more error theory is this. Error theory basically says that they recognize that moral facts exist, but they're all false. And what they mean by that is that there is an error in saying a moral fact as opposed to any other evidential fact or just empirical fact, because there's certain things that are in a moral proposition that if I say, for example, stealing is wrong, there's no property called wrongness. It's not like I'm saying, the sky is blue, or the property of blue I'm attributing to the sky. There is no property of wrongness. And so you cannot instantiate wrongness into the sentence, stealing is wrong. You could take it prescriptively. A prescriptivism would say, do not steal. That would be a mandate, right? So stealing is wrong is basically saying do not steal. And so what error theorists say is that it's a more anti-realist position because they're all false, even though they're moral propositions that you can assign a truth value to. They are false because of an error. Now, somebody asked me the other day, I forget, it was Kyle that asked me this, and it was a great question. He said, why do we care if objective morality exists or not? And I go, yeah, you know what? We really don't. However, there are people that do. Matter of fact, this is a critical topic in artificial intelligence, because if there are objective moral facts, then you can treat moral propositions with logic, reasoning, right? I mean, you could literally say, if P is true, then this kind of thing, right? So when you're programming AI, it does help to know if objective moral facts do in fact exist. And the problem that we run into is that when certain people hear objective moral facts, they fall into the theist trap. And I see a lot of atheists doing this. They say there are no moral facts because they're not anything written in the universe. There's nothing about space-time that says, hey, this moral fact has to exist. And that's what the theist posits. Well, yes, some theists do posit that, but you know what? They're just fundamentally wrong on that. It's just, I've never seen a philosopher, maybe you guys can correct me, I've never seen a real philosopher ever argue, and maybe William incorrect, but I don't think he even does. But I don't think anybody ever argues there's something written in space-time that these moral facts exist. I think that's just a straw man argument.
That's the same thing as an atheist saying, well, I believe nothing, because the word belief has been so tainted in a lot of theistic discussions. However, the fact of the matter is belief is still a subset of knowledge. So even if you say I believe nothing, well, that doesn't work, because that's not how that word works.
Well, you don't know anything.
Yes.
Literally, yeah, people, yeah. And again, I wrote a blog on this. Go to www.greatdebatecommunity.com and read my blog on the problems of not believing. And it's not about God. It's about the problems of saying, I don't believe that you exist, or I have no beliefs. When you say you have no beliefs, you are telling people you know nothing.
That's right. I don't even believe I'm here. I don't believe I'm talking to you.
And it's the same reason why when somebody...
Also, Steve doesn't exist, guys.
And I don't exist.
Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that.
We already know Steve doesn't exist. That's not news. That's not news.
But it's true, right? If I say I don't believe in anything, then at that point I cannot go to any theory of knowledge and say I have knowledge on this. I literally have no knowledge by saying.
Well, you can't know something that you don't believe.
Right. Exactly.
Also, Apologia just corrected me on this. It's knowledge is a subset of belief, not the other way around. You are right. I misspoke. It is early in the morning.
Don't encourage him.
Yeah, don't encourage Paul. No, Paul's right. Knowledge is a subset of belief, not the other way around. You have to have.
Tell him he's right. You just correct yourself and don't attribute it to him.
Sounds like there's a personal issue happening here.
Some cartoon guy in the live chat is right.
Well, I'm also some cartoon guy, and Paul, you know what? I'll make as many Star Wars intros as I want, no matter how hard you'll grill me for it.
Yeah, Paul Gias wrote this like 5-paragraph thing correcting all the little details that Cirrus got wrong in his Star Wars intro.
Oh, that's awesome.
And it wasn't even on my channel. It was an intro.
I did see that.
How fast it was going, like everything. Everything was just Apologia was not fucking satisfied with that Star Wars.
He took you to task.
Nothing that you could do to change his mind.
And you know what the best part was? The best part about this is that Apologia specifically delegated it over to me because everybody was like, "Oh, let's let Paul do it. Paul's the Star Wars guy," and Paul was like, "No, let's let Cirrus do it. That's fine. I don't hold a monopoly on all things Star Wars." And then directly afterwards, just grills the shit out of me.
No, he set you up. Come on.
He put you on a rock and just stirred you around like it was hilarious.
Yeah, that was planned from the get-go. Paul's pretty smart to know. He can do that kind of stuff. He can manipulate it.
He's maniacal.
All right, so let's go through this real quick. So he breaks this down, I think, into 5 or 6 different things. The main claim that Cosmic Skeptic makes is that nobody can provide an objective moral framework. No, there is no such thing, whether you're an atheist or theist. Before that, he actually thought again that if you believed in a God, you could. And I think, obviously, Cirrus, you brilliantly pointed out that divine command theory.
Don't ever do that again.
No, you brilliantly pointed out you're not brilliant. You did something that was brilliant. There's a difference there. But divine command theory does fall under ethical subjectivism. It is contingent upon the mind of God. However, it also goes to the youthful dilemma of what is good, and what comes from God. Is it good, or is it good commanded because it's good, or whatever horn you want to pick on that. Each one of the horn has bad stuff, by the way. One of them, it just makes it arbitrary, and the other one makes them less than omnipotent because there's a higher value to being good that God has to abide by, right? And if he's all powerful and all knowing and omnipotent and all this other stuff, then there cannot be something outside of him that he has to follow, right? So, yeah. But anyways, so Cosmic Skeptic has changed his moral framework to say now, well, wait a minute. Before I thought that if you believed in God, you could have an objective morality, which I think that most everybody that I know thinks so. Mm-hmm. But he wants to argue against that. So let's look at his argument. Okay. So what Dr. Malpass does here, he breaks it down exactly kind of what we mean by objective and subjective. Now, these words have so many latent meanings to them. No matter what you read, the author might use these words completely different. Matter of fact, Cosmic Skeptic uses the term objectivity in his video more than one different way. You'll find if you watch his video, he actually uses it to be demonstrable, right? Objectivity to say, I'm going to have a demonstrated experiment where I can objectively value it and without bias kind of thing. That's not how we're using that word here. It doesn't mean to demonstrate. So he very simply says basically, and this comes from Carnetie's videos, carneties.org, excellent fucking videos.
Great channel.
Oh my God. He's
amazing.
And he's a member of the Great Debate community. Yes, he is.
Oh, is he? Oh.
Yes, he is. Yeah.
I love his channel.
You know what? I'll have to reach out to him again. I talked to him when he first joined, and I was like, dude, we really got to get you on a show because I just think the world of his videos. And he said, yeah, great, love to, but we haven't followed through that. So my bad. But they say X is objective if and only if X does not depend on what we think or feel about X. In other words, 1 + 1 = 2 is objectively true, no matter if Shannon thinks it's 3 because she failed math.
No matter if we're using Roman numerals or Arabic numerals, the concept of 2 is the same.
In real numbers, yeah. I mean,
I still don't get it. What?
What?
Is it?
What's math?
Is it because you am woman?
I is? Oh my God.
just remember, in ring theory, you can have 1 = 0. It's called a ring zero.
Oh.
Zero ring. Yeah, zero rings are cool. Okay, so yeah, it's true. It is true. 1 could equal 0, but in those particular cases, it's an abuse of notation. One means the multiplicative identity, and the 0 means the additive identity. So that's what X actually they stand for. Anyways, though, off topic, X is subjective if and only if X does depend on what we think about X. And I think that's pretty self-explanatory. I think we both, I mean, all of us kind of use those definitions, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, that's kind of what I use as well. It's just an objective fact that it holds true, regardless if you think if it's true or not. And this is, I think, where Cosmic Skeptic jumps the rails, because he thinks that one, X is objective if and only if it can be demonstrated or proven to be the case, which is really strange. And he also thinks that just because somebody can think 1 + 1 = 2, therefore it cannot be objective. Or excuse me, 1 + 1 = 3, it can't be objective, because I have my own subjective opinion on this. So he's conflating the belief with the content of the belief, which again, Dr. Malpass points out later on in here. The belief is that I believe 1 + 1 = 3, but the content of the belief 1 + 1 = 3 is wrong. It is 1 + 1 = 2. That's true regardless. Yeah.
Can I summate this just to make sure that I'm understanding correctly, and maybe other people, who are
Yeah,
listening?
we'll mansplain for you, sure.
Yeah, Jesus Christ. Every day I ask myself why I'm talking to you, and I never have a good answer.
We've been agreeing on so much lately, and even you and Ocean agree. I don't know what's wrong with this planet.
What I'm hearing is that Shannon is falling for your trap.
Oh, Jesus.
I'm gonna convince her eventually.
Oh, God. So what I'm hearing is that he's saying that something can be objective only if we can demonstrate it to be true. However, something can be objectively true, and we could have not yet uncovered a way to demonstrate it.
You hit the nail on the head. Bingo. And in fact, again, Dr. Malpass.
So the objectivity of truth doesn't have anything to do with what we currently are able to understand. Something could be objectively true and still be beyond the realm of our understanding.
You absolutely got it right. Yeah, matter of fact, something could be objectively true, but not.
Could you mansplain that to me a little bit better, though, because I'm not sure if I understood what I just said.
Yeah, speak slowly for you. Yeah, no, you're exactly right. So for the live chat that I'll mansplain to, because Shannon gets it, she basically said that there are certain things that could be factual that you don't have to prove to be factual. And we have that all the time in math. We know certain theorems are true. They are facts, but we can't prove them. So whatever. So let's move on here. Okay, so right here, so even he points it out. For example, unproven mathematical formulas are still true or false, independently of what anybody thinks about them. Although some philosophers disagree, most don't. I think those would be probably some kind of mathematical Platonist or realist. I don't know. But there could be things that are true independently of what we think, but not demonstrable. Very true, right? So,
Steve is very prepared.
Yeah, right.
I got people messaging me across the board here. Okay, so I didn't mean to show that. Sorry, guys. Yeah, somebody mentioned that Deborah mentioned me. I know she did. So let's see here. All right, so conversely, something can be demonstrated to be the case, yet true independently from what we think about it. For example, we can demonstrate that the value of $1 versus the pound by pointing to the latest exchange rate, but all the monetary value is a product of collective human agreement. It would not exist if minds did not exist at all. This goes back to what I said before many times, that morality only exists because we're moral agents, right? If we did not have sentience, if we were not objects of moral concern, we would not have anything about morality. Stop messaging you people. It's like, I keep forgetting I'm streaming. I'll show your shit.
That basically means everybody spam Steve to the point where he can't even think straight. Do it.
No, don't, because I want to listen.
He doesn't exist, so what difference does it make?
You know, it's funny. People, I try to message back everybody, right? I like people messaging me, and I do have conversations with them. But I tell you, there's certain people have the worst fucking timing. Like Mr. Brass is in the live chat. I love Mr. Brass, right? Worst timing possible. I could have like a fire going on right here, something major going on, and he'll be like wanting to have a conversation. It's like bad timing. So I'm not ignoring anybody, but sometimes timing is really, really bad. So anyway, so the reason why we have things that are objectively true about values of monetary rates is because of economics. We wouldn't have that if there weren't people, right? Same principle. Same principle. This is what goes back to why dreams are inert. You have no moral concern in a dream. You have no moral concern in a video game because they're not moral agents. So you have no ethical considerations to take when you're in a dream. All right. So being mind independent and being demonstrable are logically distinct notions that should not be conflated. Unfortunately, there's this sort of ambiguity when Cosmic Skeptic says objective. For instance, when Cosmic Skeptic makes a central claim, he seems to be infected with the ambiguity. He says, I am now of the view that all morality, even religious morality, is ultimately subjective. Now, Dr. Malpass points out here that depends on a mental state, right? And if all morality is, including religious, is just based upon a mental state, he is basically de facto saying objective morality can never be the case, because it's all subjective. It's all in the mind, right?
Right.
But that doesn't change the fact that the content of the proposition is still objective. 1 + 1 is still true, even if my belief about that is subjective. That's the difference between the belief and the content of the belief. And this is where he makes a huge mistake.
So how does that transition to objective morality? The 1 + 1 equals.
Because if there's a moral fact, okay, let's talk.
Because I feel like it's not super clarified for me, your position. So there's other people watching. So let me.
It goes back to the is-ought type of relationship. And I use the term race a lot because I just think it's an easy thing for a race. If you want to win a race, you ought to run fast. Now, there are times where you may cheat, right? You can cheat and win a race, but if your goal is to win the race, it is still an objective fact, regardless if you agree with it or not, that you ought to run fast. You don't have to.
So it depends on a predetermination of what the goal is then. So in order for morality to be objective, we have to agree on a goal. Is the agreement on that goal an objective endeavor?
The goal can be completely subjective. Like Sam Harris bases on harm and benefits, right?
Right. So once you agree on the goal, there's objective things that you can do to attain that goal.
Yes.
But figuring out the goal itself is subjective.
Yeah, but that's where he runs into the problem, because even goes with the God thing. Like if you accept
God
as a God
mandates it, and therefore it is objective because you already know what the goal is.
Yes.
It's been predetermined for you.
Yeah, but see, exactly right. But see what Cosmic Skeptic is doing? He's basically saying, well,
that there are no goals.
There are no
any goals.
Yeah, he's saying objective morality can't exist, period, even with goals. Well, that's ridiculous. I think everybody here agrees if you have certain goals, anybody can make an objective moral framework. The argument is, do those frameworks really exist? Well, based upon if you all accept that, like Sam Harris's approach, then yes. What's the big deal? So is objective morality. Big freaking deal. I don't understand why so many atheists get upset by that. It's just saying that a moral proposition is true or false.
It's the same thing as with the belief issue. It's just because it's been so poisoned that whenever somebody says, hey, objective morality may be true, a lot of atheists think that de facto means that deity is true when objective morality only deals with the standard. That's all that objective morality really cares about. But because it has been so poisoned in conversation, people avoid it like the plague. And I think that's where the issue lies. Yeah, and even the name we shall not speak, starting with a P, ending in A, having ologia in the middle.
Oh God!
He said, "I'm the funny one on this show." I know. Yeah, he says, if you want to win the race, cross the line. It should be, if you want to win the race, you ought to cross the finish line first. Yeah, that's an objective fact, right? I mean, who would argue against that? So when people say there's no objective facts, well, of course there's objective facts. That's true whether I believe it or not.
Yep.
I really think more people are objective moral realists than they realize, and more people do subscribe to moral objectivists. But the reason that some people don't is, for example, like Ocean may not be a moral realist for his reasons, but moral anti-realists, all they're saying, for the most part, many of them, is that moral propositions are not real propositions where you can take it and say this is true or false. A prescriptionist, for example, like I said, they'll take a moral propositions like stealing is wrong and say stealing is wrong translates to do not steal. It's a commandment. It is a directive, right? There's an invective there to say don't steal. That's what that proposition means. So it's not something that is true or false. It is telling you don't steal. That's how prescriptivism works, or emotivism.
But when you inject the word wrong, then it becomes subjective because the word wrong in and of itself is open to interpretation. So
yeah, right or wrong. Oh man, that's where it really gets bad.
What's the definition of good, Steve?
Yeah, there is none.
Can you define evil, please?
No, and that's
define evil for me.
Right.
No, and that's the problem.
I was reading a philosophy text that was dealing.
I can't define good. No, I really can't.
Well, yeah, the text that I was reading was dealing with morality in polytheism, And even it was like, well, for the purposes of this, I'm not going to bother even trying to define good or evil. We're just going to roll with it.
Yeah, no, and I get
And it's just like this is a philosophy text that is just like, yeah, these terms people know 'em. Fuck it. Getting into it is going to require
I
a much
totally
bigger book.
get that. I can tell you right now, I won't really bother to find good for this particular argument and this particular, even for Cosmic Skeptic, because I agree with more on the open question argument. There is no way to properly define the word good in this.
But that's the thing. His whole definition, when he gives the definition, this is where I encounter the problem: is that you ought to do what is good.
No, okay.
I was like, and you ought not to do what is bad.
Yeah,
I was like, that is the most, like, what does that
so
even
bad.
mean?
It's so bad. It's so bad.
That is so relative.
That's like when I had a conversation with somebody on Twitter the other day who, when I asked them to define evil because they were saying something about good and evil, I don't remember what it was. I asked them to define evil and they said, well, is evil a thing? Where does evil come from? And I'm like, okay, well, that's not really a good question, but define evil. And they said, well, if evil is just the absence of good, where does evil come from? And I said, well, hold on. We're not talking about heat. And we're not talking about heat and science where cold is just an absence of heat. It's not the same thing.
Right. Yeah, because something could be inert, right? Like,
yes, you can have something that's morally
inert. It could also not be bad. It can be a neutral. Like
something,
just sitting here staring at the wall is neither good nor bad, I guess.
Yeah, if something is morally inert, it is not
morally
good, but that does not automatically make it bad because there's an absence of good in there. That's completely useless.
That's called the privation argument. And the privation argument is basically defining evil as the lack of good. And there's a lot of problems with that. But that's the privation argument if you ever hear it. But yeah, the thing with good and evil is that when it's like porn, when you see it, right? So there's reasons why these words have a hard time being defined, and people say, well, you're just ambiguous. Well, no, if you actually look into what they mean by good, and this is one of the things that again Dr. Malpass points out, and I point out the same thing to Rationality Rules about a week ago, that you can't define good in any really kind of cogent way in these discussions because of the open question argument that Moore poses. And I'm going to read it. I'm going to read you the open question argument so people know what it is. It's basically saying that if X is good, then the question, is it true that X is good, is meaningless? And then premise 2 is the question, is it true that X is good, is not meaningless? It is an open question. Conclusion, X is not good. And the problem with that is when you ask the question, is it true that X is good, that is an open question. It's not a meaningless question. It's very open. It could mean a lot of things. And an example given, and I'm reading right from Wikipedia here, no real formal source, but it says, I know he is vegan, but does he eat meat? That's a closed question, right? Because if I know you're vegan, I already know the answer to that. You don't eat meat. Right? But when you ask a question, and this goes in the naturalistic fallacy, I know what is pleasurable. I know that it's pleasurable, but is it good? Because if you start defining good in terms of pleasure, then Moore argues that's a naturalistic fallacy. You're saying good is being defined in what can be defined naturally by pleasure or happiness or something like that. And that's what he's called the naturalistic fallacy. Unless you ask Ronnie, True Empiricism, and he doesn't understand the naturalistic fallacy. He thinks that a naturalistic fallacy is saying, hey, it happens in nature, therefore it's a fallacy. No, Ronnie, it's not. That's not what it means. He's done it before. That's why I pointed out. It's funny.
It also means that good is relative too. Like you'll engage this theist argument quite a bit, where they say, well, what if you think it's good to kill people? Like what if that's what would give you pleasure? What if that's what if raping children would give you pleasure? To like by that definition, that's good, right? Like you have to be a little bit more tighter. Oh my God, I just went full Nova Scotian. A little bit more tight on your definitions.
Yeah, no, I agree with
that. Tighter.
Tighter. Yeah, say boot again.
Tighter on your definition. Yeah. To be a little more tight on your definitions if you want them to mean anything in this context. Because if you're that ambiguous, then you're opening yourself up to a serious argument about the dangers of subjectivism. And I'm a moral subjectivist. Which is
I'm about to sit down.
I mean, like that is just too ambiguous to call that moral.
I mean, do
to
you,
my
do you
mind.
really think that you're subjective? And let me give you the definition of subjectivist, and because I'm not
Do
trying to
it.
redefine your position.
No,
I'm just- yeah.
like I'd rather either solidify it or question it. I'm open. So
Okay.
yes,
So
please.
subjectivism is held to be the doctrine that our own mental activity is the only unquestionable fact of our experience. In other words, all facts are contingent or experientially, right? Instead of a shared communal experience. So there's no external or objective truth. Now, I have a problem with subjectivism because I do believe there's an objective reality out there. I just don't think that we have access to it.
So, okay, so I believe that there's an objective reality. Now, I don't think that I would transition that to morality.
And that's fair. And that's fair. That there are two different things. I'm not trying to
There are
conflate
two
them.
very different
Yes,
things. I'm a
yes.
moral subjectivist. I'm not a I'm not subjective. Like, I believe that I exist in the world and that there are things that I can know about the universe. I mean, I don't believe that we're in a simulation, right? I don't believe that, but I think that morals are subjective.
Yeah, see, and I don't. I think morals. I tend to moral realism, which
Then
is
how did they
more
evolve over
objectivism.
time? Like, why are they
Well,
different now than they
because
have been in the past?
simple, because what you're saying is subjectivism. I think I think you're actually describing relativism. There's something called
Yeah.
descriptive moral relativism that we know cultures will have different morals. That's
Okay.
fine. Nobody I know of will argue against that. That's relativism, right?
Sure.
As opposed to absolutism. Moral absolutism is the position that things are wrong no matter what, right? I think who argued for that? That was good grief, Kierkegaard. I think at one time, wasn't he saying like, you should always lie? I mean, never lie. You should always tell the truth. And then people brought up, well, what about it? You're hiding a Jew. Wasn't that Kierkegaard? But
Yeah.
for example, stealing is always wrong. Doesn't matter what it is. It's always immoral. There's an intrinsic value in stealing that if you steal, it's immoral, even if it's done for the greater good.
Depends
or
on it doesn't
survive.
depend on the context.
Right. I don't agree with moral absolutism at all, even though
Mhm.
that's objective morality. No. And I think what happens is that theists will say, oh, well, you subscribe to objective morality, therefore you think that stealing is wrong all the time or blah, blah. No. That's not what it means. So
I was in a church. I remember a youth group lesson that I had when I was like a little young, wide-eyed Christian, well, naive and bushy-tailed, and they were preaching absolute morality, and I was like, wait a minute, what if? And then the lesson continued, and I was like, wait a minute, what if? And I was told to leave after a while.
yeah.
It's like, this conversation apparently isn't for you. And
Whenever you're
started my problem with churches and asking questions. It's like,
yeah, see, that's really bad considering that any that is not a noise
Are
I
you
wanted
okay?
to have.
Yeah.
That's not me. That's in the kitchen.
I have moral concern. Is Pam, you okay?
Why did you automatically assume because it happened in the kitchen it was Pam?
Because you're talking to me in here. There's nothing sexist about that. Wow. Wow, listen to you. By the way, next time you do something about Pam,
it was the fucking cat.
Pam, take that pan you dropped and just knock Circe upside the head. It's okay.
Pam, you were told to take the pan that you dropped and knock me upside the head with it. Now, I know that you're sitting in a chair in the same room as me, so you're actually asking my roommate to beat me to death with a pan. So,
pretty much, yeah, more.
Okay,
remember, we're more. I'm going to take Shannon's moral subjectivism and apply it to my own standards. So, no.
But did I suffer? Did I have to deal with suffering, or did I just deal with pain? Sorry,
are you appealing to grounding in harms and benefits? Okay.
Though I was gonna say, Ocean, it's really telling to me whenever any institution that is trying to educate you, and I would argue that a youth group is trying to educate, at least in some form.
Oh no, they were absolutely educating in that.
Yes. It bothers me whenever any institution that is trying to educate in any topic dissuades you from asking questions, especially difficult ones, because it should be their job to be able to answer those questions, and if they can't, it should be their job to encourage research into those questions, not force you out. Like that's very telling to me.
Yeah, I totally
remember
agree.
who it was and everything, and just like I was very confused as to why I was being like shut down at every pass, because I thought it was a good question, because I asked about what if you steal bread when you're starving.
Yes.
Yeah,
or if you steal bread for your starving family. I think that was actually the example that I brought up, and it was like, no, stealing is absolutely wrong, and I was like, well, why?
That's bullshit.
Wait, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, well, that's why when you go down that path of moral absolutism, I think that that's where people want to go. Oh, there's no such thing as objective morality, because they always equate objective morality with moral absolutism. And there's
But
other
it's not
things
the
out
same
there.
thing.
I subscribe either more to moral realism or what's called moral universalism. I actually kind of like moral universalism, and I know that Sock Account is a big fan of moral universalism too. And by the way, I don't think you have to subscribe to any one point of view. I think that you can say, you know what, this makes sense, and that makes sense a little bit. I mean, I don't think you have to say, oh, I'm fully a moral realist or moral universalist, which is both of them are objective morals. But
Steve, I have to disagree with you.
The counter argument that I usually have is about ants. Like if we'd reached a world in which ants had evolved to the point of having some kind of like moral if ants had moral positions, so they've reached the point of having a consciousness in which they can codify that stuff. I think that the moral code that they would support would have a way more collectivist attitude about it, much higher value on self-sacrifice, and a higher value on like protecting the queen and that kind of stuff, whereas humans, given our biology differences between ants, have a completely different set than what they would think. And that's one of the things that gets me thinking. Is I think that one of the reasons why we have arguments about objective morality and such, and one reason why we find it to be so convincing, is we're the only ones on the planet that have reached a point of having these conversations about morality in the first place. And I suppose if there's a different kind, then if there was a different species that had done it, their morality being radically different would be huge evidence against, especially moral absolutism, but it would be evidence against objective morality generally as well.
Yeah, I see your correlation there, and I obviously, because if ants were moral agents, they would probably think things are a little bit different than from us, right? But that kind of does go to relativism in some way. But I mean, if somebody asked the moral universalism position, the moral universalism position is simply basically there are some moral facts that exist that apply to all cultures out there, regardless of the ethnicity, regardless of the type of culture. There's certain things that transcend like things like race and culture, sex, and things like that. Now, I think that's probably true, but I think that, to me, that sounds like it kind of is included in moral realism, right? You're just saying, hey, look, there are objective moral facts out there that you can take a proposition and say it's true. Then you're a moral realist. And I think that I fall more into that, except that I really do like moral nihilism. I'm not going to lie. I don't know why, but error theory or moral nihilism admits that there's moral facts, but they're all wrong. Anyways, let's get back to this. I know, Shannon, are you back?
I'm back, present.
Okay.
Sorry.
I was kind of waiting for you to go. I know you hadn't really gone through a lot of this yet.
I want to know if Shannon agrees with me again about ants.
Oh God!
I didn't hear all of it, but I'm sure.
Yeah,
The horror.
Awesome.
The horror.
I'm assuming we were having a
I'm
conversation
slowly
about how
converting
morality
Shannon
depends
to
on individual
polytheism.
sentience, and we only ascribe it to our own specific species.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah,
You
I
de
agree
facto-
then. Then
You
yes,
de facto
okay.
agree with Ocean.
I do. It's weird. It keeps happening.
Yeah. Hopefully,
Soon you'll be a polytheist, Shannon.
I almost am, actually.
gotta
I
find
can
someone
feel
very
it. I can feel Thor inside me right now.
Oh God, no.
how can I make this a shit show if you guys keep agreeing?
I don't know. I don't know what to tell you.
So Cosmic Skeptic, he seems to define this as morality as the intuition that we ought to do, which is good, and ought not to do, which is bad. What I think is one of the worst ways.
What does that even mean?
It's so bad. It's so bad. And we're going to break down why here. So it does beg the question against a moral realist. Look, a moral realist position is basically X is good and what one ought to do. Now, there's different way you can look at what oughts are for what ought to do. You can appeal to what's called deontology, which is the duty. You can appeal to consequentialism, which is the consequences of an action. But it's funny, he appeals to Moore in here, and Moore actually was an anti-consequentialist. This is weird. But so he defines morality explicitly in terms of intuitions, which are mental states. If there are no minds to have intuitions, then there would be no morality according to Cosmic Skeptic's definitions. That morality rules out moral truths as being objectively true from the outset. Yeah, I think it's begging the question because he's assuming in his premise the argument he's trying to argue for. He's assuming that these things are based upon intuitions, therefore intuitions are based on clearly intuition is a mental state. So it's saying in my premise that there is no objective morality because of I mean, no, his premise is that all types of morality are mental states, which automatically assumes that they cannot be objective from the onset. That would be begging the question, right? Because you're assuming in the one premise the argument you're making. By saying their intuitions, you're automatically saying they're mental states.
Right. I don't really disagree with him though on that one. But the only part of his argument that I disagree with is the part where he proposes that if you're a theist, that you can't have an objective morality.
I don't know where he gets that from either.
Yeah, that's very
That's
strange
the
to
only
me
thing I disagree with.
because if you're a theist and you have if you claim an objective moral standard, then you have objective morality at that point. All objective morality cares about is having a standard. That's
right. And I mean, from our perspective, you don't have objective morality because you're adhering to a false standard. Like the premise isn't valid, right? Like it's not true. Sorry, the premise isn't true, so it's not valid.
It's valid. It's valid, not sound.
It's valid, but it's not true.
Yeah, no, I get that.
Right?
From your perspective, as God doesn't exist, therefore there could be no objective morals that He's giving, right?
But from their perspective, the premise is both true and valid, so that's why they believe they can have it. I mean, I can understand his argument because essentially his argument is, as an atheist, I know that it's not true, and or if it is true, it's subject to my definition of God is that it's up to His opinion.
I totally get that. I totally get that. The problem,
which isn't a fair argument. I think it's too easy to pick apart. I mean, we just spent an hour picking it apart.
Well, it's bigger than that, though, because he makes, again, a major mistake when he says that it's not that God doesn't exist, therefore there's no objective morality. That's a whole different argument. It's bad, but it's a different argument. His argument is, even if God exists, there is no objective morality. And that doesn't make any sense, because if God does exist, I would say clearly there's objective morality. Yeah. It's possible. But he's saying there's no possibility. So he's actually kind of de facto saying, well, it's not even possible God exists. Because he's saying there's no possibility of objective morality. Well, if God does exist, then of course it's possible.
Well, if He exists and He cares about moral activity.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can
if you assume He's got a horse in the race of moral activity, then sure.
But you can't say it's impossible. Of course, it's possible. To demonstrate the impossibility of objective morality, you need a much bigger argument, to say the least. All right. So his conditions are this, and this is where again it goes off the rails, I think. He says, if something is good, we ought to do it. If something is bad, we ought not to do it. And that kind of sounds like platitudes. I agree. I think that sounds, okay, that makes sense. But no, that's not a good argument. Intuitively, yeah. But this is one of those times common sense.
Until you scrutinize it.
Yeah. Okay. Did you read his argument about why that's not a great way to do that?
No, not yet.
Okay. For example,
I think those are entailed in the definitions of the words, though. Like if there's something that's, it seems like a truism that if something is good, then we ought to do it rather than a platitude.
Well, but the problem is there's certain things that that if that's going to be the argument, then if it's by necessity, if you ought to do it by necessity, if there's an obligation to do it, then it has to be something that's possible. And then we'll go into and talk about, well, certain things are not possible, therefore it cannot be obligatory, because obligatory implies possibility. And so when he says that something is good, we ought to do it. Well, okay. Like friendship, the example that Dr. Malpass gives, friendship is morally good. Let's just, say that, but we don't have a moral obligation to have friends, right? So even though something is good, is it something we ought to do? Do we have a moral obligation to have friends? Well,
yes, no, Steve, I'm not morally obligated to be your friend. Fuck off.
Right? Yeah, there's no moral obligation. You do that because of I have shills, and you're just one of the shills.
That's part of it. If it wasn't for all these Illuminati boxes,
I do appreciate the patience.
Let's see here. All right, so he breaks it down, and I love this. He breaks this down on a moral scale, and I think this is really good. So something could be both good and obligatory, like saving a person's life. Again, the courts have said that's not true, right? Courts have said that you have no obligation to save somebody, which I think is bullshit, but whatever. But you also have good but not obligatory, like friendship. You have neutral, and these are inert things. Like, I walked outside today. That's inert, right? There's no moral obligation to do anything. Bad but not impermissible. okay, like gambling or eating meat, and then both bad and impermissible, like murder and rape, because those are appeals to deontology that it's against the law to do so, right? There are legal reasons why you can't murder and rape. There's also other reasons you can apply as well. I mean, bad for society and whatever your virtue, your normative virtue theory is, why murder and rape is wrong. But it's basically, we do agree that those are bad and they're impermissible. But since you can have things like good without being obligatory and bad but not being impermissible, it seems to me it does violate these definitions. Do you agree?
Yeah. Yes, I do. I have to look at it because something it all hinges on good, and more so good than bad.
Yeah, good is like I said, the whole point of the open question.
Because how do you define
good?
Good.
Yeah, how do you define
But like, do you have? Yeah. Like, what umbrella is that? Like, what do you put under that umbrella of good?
And this is what he's breaking down. So he says, if X is obligatory, then X is possible. I think that's got to be true. I don't see how that can't be true. If you have an obligation to do something, then it seems to entail to me that has to be something that is possible, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't have an obligation to do something that's not possible, and that just doesn't make any sense to me. So he gives a really good argument in this particular case, and it's funny, is this is the argument that Dr. Malpass had given to me prior to him writing this, and I asked him, "That's really good. Can I give that to other people?" And he said, "Yeah, sure," but I hadn't done it yet, and he wrote this blog, so I'm glad that he did, because I really thought this was a good argument. He says, imagine you have one $5 note in your pocket, and you're faced with two charity collection buckets, one for a dog charity, one for a cat charity. Giving one to the dog charity is morally good, and giving to the cat charity is morally good. Giving to both is morally good, right? If you give, that makes sense. So if we ought to do what is good, then we ought to give the $5 in both the dog and the cat bucket. But it is possible to do that. The same bill cannot go in each bucket. Tearing the bill in half will result in giving nothing of any value to either, which is bad. So we have something which is good to do, give to both, and therefore something we ought to do by using Cosmic Skeptic's, definitions.
Yeah.
But which is something we cannot do. Thus there is something we ought to do, we cannot do, which clashes with the ought implies can principle. We can't avoid this difficulty by recognizing that although both are good, neither is obligatory, which throws out Cosmic Skeptic's principle. And I agree. You cannot define what is good by what you're obliged to do.
There between what is good and what is maximally good, though.
What do you mean?
I think that it's amoral to not give to either one. It's not. It's you can still ascribe that there's an ought in doing something that's good. In this case, giving all of your money to charity. I don't think that it matters that because there's more than one charity available, giving to one means that you've absconded money from the other. That doesn't follow to me either.
That's not what he's arguing, though. I think you're reading that wrong. He's saying,
I think that I think that the way he's wording it, it does frame as if you give money to, if you have $5 and there's two charities available, and you give one to one and not the other, then there's some sort of like not goodness that's happened by not giving to the other.
He does say that, but that's not his main point. And let me see if I can reframe this. If something is good, we ought to do it. And he's just saying that ought is an obligation, because he even said in the video, we're obliged to do something. So he's meaning this to mean if something is good, we are obliged to do it. If I remember the video, that's exactly what Cosmic Skeptic said. If that's the case, then by this premise, that if X is obligatory, X is possible, right? So if by his definition, if it is good, we have an obligation to do it. If we have an obligation to do it, it must be possible. By the cat and dog charity, it is good that we give to both. We have an obligation to give both, but it is not possible to give to both, which means that the initial contradiction by reductio is that you can't have this. It's basically a reductio saying that this cannot be true.
I don't agree with that argument, though. Just because of multiple options doesn't mean that taking one option is bad.
That's not that again. That has nothing to do with what I just said, though. That is another thing he said. But follow the premises again, and Cyrus, maybe you can try to reframe it.
I'm saying it's just because it's not like. All right.
I think it has to do with the framing of the way he is saying it. He's saying it. If it's good, we ought to do it, and ought means essentially an obligation. We
Yes.
have to do it if it's good.
Right.
If it's good, we have to do it. But what Alex Malpass, other two Alexes making opposite
Yes.
arguments. What Alex Malpass is saying is this can't be our definition of morality, because if this is our definition of what is moral, even from a subjective standpoint, we're going to encounter impossible scenarios that negate this premise.
Bingo.
You have to this
I agree with that
scenario
in
means we
principle.
can't do both. Therefore, this premise it can't be upheld.
Yeah, let me work it backwards for
I
you.
agree
Ocean.
with that in concept, but I don't think that the example does anything to that
I think
end.
it does. I think it's perfect. Let me work it backwards for you. We have
Steve
two
thinks it's perfect, Ocean, so just shut up.
Yeah.
If
I
I can,
swear to God.
if I can reframe,
Yes.
You might be able to say if there's like a chasm of fire in between you and the charity.
maybe. So for instance, you have let's say you have two people dying in a desert, and you have equal love and respect for both of them. You have no more obligation towards one than the other. It's not like one is a stranger and one is your mom. You have just enough water to save one, but if you give an equal amounts of water to both of them, they will both die. Choosing one of them is essentially choosing for the other one to die.
That's true, but again, I don't think that's the bigger picture.
That might be a better example than what.
But
I'm just using that as a way to reframe the
Like you ought to
cat
say
dog money.
Hang on. I don't think that's the bigger argument.
Also means
Dr.
money.
Malpass
You
is
can't
making,
make
though.
a moral choice in that scenario. There's no choice in that scenario you can make that's moral, even though you're doing something good.
But let's work.
Honestly, that means just time to drink the water yourself.
Save yourself is the only moral thing to do, right? Now, let me work this backwards. Let me work this backwards. So you want to use the charity or the water?
It's moral to keep myself in tip-top condition, and I'm in a desert with water.
Yeah. By the way,
Always put your air mask on first. They tell you that on the airplane.
Exactly. So I'm gonna
Save
go with
yourself.
water. You guys, I'm gonna find another bottle for you.
there's only
I'm
one
gonna go get
narcissist. There's only
Gotta
one.
try.
There's only one narcissist in this room, and it ain't me. Trust me. We all know who we're talking about in here.
I just really like water, Steve.
So look at. So let me. Do you want to use the water example or the dog charity? Which one do you like? I don't care. I can use either.
Well, I feel like if we use the water, I think we've already explored the water sample example, but
Just tell me how you want me to work this backwards for you.
well, go into if Malpass is using the damn
Charity.
dog
Okay.
bill thing. He might agree with the water example is better because I think that the situation is a little bit more clear there. But I don't see how in the case of charities, when you give to one charity, that doesn't mean that.
I get you. Okay, let
You
me
know,
let me walk this backwards. So I don't think you're looking at the bigger picture. Do you agree that
I think the problem is I'm looking at the bigger picture.
Yeah, you're not looking at the big picture. So you agree, though, that there's two charities, one for the dog, one for the cat. And do you agree that we cannot possibly, in this situation, give to both charities? Would you agree?
Well, unless you split up the money.
You can't. So
That's
but then you can't. You have a $5
You've
bill.
only got a $5 bill.
That's the whole point.
That's the whole reason
okay.
Yeah, you devalue it if you whip it
And
apart.
you can give to one or the other, sure.
That's
Okay,
the whole reason I use the water example is to remove that option.
All right, hang on. So you can't give to both, right? You agree? It's not possible to give to both.
Sometimes they have changed, but sure.
I will fuck your
God
world.
damn it. You don't have change this time, Ocean. Jesus.
I've already agreed with this premise.
All right. So
It's like
All right.
logistically, I'm somebody who
All
likes
right.
to come up with
all right,
solutions.
so you can't give $5 to both. So that means it is impossible, which means it cannot be obligatory. If it cannot be obligatory, then it can't be what we ought to do.
I just don't know who's saying it's obligatory for me to give more money
Cosmic
than I have.
Skeptic. That's his argument. He is saying
No,
yes.
that's an uncharitable. Okay. The problem that I have with this is that it seems to be that they're taking an uncharitable interpretation of what he means.
No. That's what he said in his video. He says if it's something as good as we were obligated. He used the word once, I believe.
Obligated.
Obligated to do it. We ought to do it means an obligation that we ought to do something. That's
But it doesn't mean that we ought to give in that situation. You can simply just modify what's going on and say you ought to give all of your money to charity in this situation. I think this is
right.
kinda
But
weird,
he's defining this
but
to
you
be
can give-
obligatory.
It doesn't matter which one. Like it's just
I think you're missing again.
Because there could be an infinite,
Like, if
I
you
get
have a
Ocean's argument. There
puppy
could be
and
an
a kitten
infinite amount of charities.
one of them.
If you have an obligation, it means that you have to do it and it must be possible. There is no possible way to give to both charities. Therefore, it cannot be obligatory. And if it cannot be obligatory,
If we look at it,
cannot fit
in the
in
reverse, real quick. Hold on.
Yeah.
If we look at it in the reverse, real quick, and you have a puppy and a kitten, and you kick one of them or you kick the other one, it's not like, you're not. It's not like one of them is more bad than the other or whatever. You're
That's
still
not what
doing
he's
something
saying.
bad there. You
He's
still
not-
ought not kick the puppy or the kitten.
Right, but he's not. You're
Not
not
like you
looking
have to kick both in order for it to be bad.
Ocean. But Ocean, if I said to you, and God, if Cosmic Skeptic is saying that he's defining what is good by what we are obligated to do. Okay, therefore, if we're obligated, it means that it must be possible. In this particular case, it is not possible to give to both charities, even though that is good to do so. It violates his own definition because it's good to give to both, but it's not. If we had an
But
obligation,
it's good to give to one.
but we can't do it because it's impossible. You understand that, right? It's
No,
impossible.
you can give to one.
But then it violates his premise because then we didn't give to the other. I mean, we have an obligation.
But that doesn't matter. You gave all your money to charity.
But an obligation means that you have a possibility to do something. If there's no possibility, you're not obligated.
But I
to.
gave my money all to charity.
Oh God. Okay. Matt Bell. We're gonna move on a little bit.
Wow.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Oh God. I would never do that.
I don't know.
Alright,
I think that this is I would love to see what Cosmic Skeptic thinks of this conversation. Especially
I
since
would
kicking
too.
puppies was brought up. But
No, Cosmic Skeptic's not gonna go out and kick puppies.
Oh my God, that I'm gonna go to bed tonight going, you know what? It's not like you have to kick both puppies in order for it to be.
kick both puppy and kitten.
So just one. Just one. Not so.
And then
Not so
there's a question
bad.
of like,
you
how
just
far
kick
do you
the
kick
puppy,
one in order for it to be bad? Does it change
is
how bad it
great.
is if you kick one like
Great.
2
I can see-
meters instead of 1 meter?
I can see the response videos tomorrow. Steve had a hangout. Oh, talk about kicking puppies. Yeah, what an asshole.
Yeah, Clown Car Posse comes out right now. Ocean is arguing about kicking puppies right now, and Steve is disagreeing with him.
Steve thinks that you need to kick all the puppies.
I think-
for it
I
to
say
be
it
bad.
again,
One
exactly.
puppy's not good enough for Steve.
Yeah, exactly. If you only kick one puppy, that's not too bad. Right? All right, so let's move on. So I don't want to really get into his main, because I don't even know how to break this down. I'm not that good at it. This is where he gets into Moore, and G.E. Moore is a philosopher, and he says that basically defining good is like defining the color yellow. It has no synonyms. So when I say, what is the definition of yellow? Sure, I can quantify and say that's, a particular photon has this particular wavelength. We're going to call that yellow, but the experience, this is why I say colors don't exist. We call it realism. But I can't really give a definition of what yellow means, right? I can't really define it in any cognitive way because it's completely a psychological experience. So goodness is kind of the same thing. What do we mean by good? And again, if you define good in what terms of pleasure, hey, I like this. I like to go kill. Therefore, it's pleasurable for me to go kill. That's good. That's a naturalistic fact.
That statement makes good relative to individual experience, just like color then.
Yeah, but it doesn't really mean anything at that point. So
Like,
he
it makes
believes.
good
What was that?
It makes good relative to perception then.
Yes. Yeah. So it's really not a good definition.
Good
right?
is relative to perception. If good is relative to perception, that is not strong moral footing.
Yeah, that's not even. That's you don't want to define things like that. We're just gonna whatever you want. We're define relative what it is. But it's funny because Cosmic Skeptic,
This seems like something that Matt Slick would comment on pretty quickly.
Oh,
you want to get him in here? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, get Matt Slick in here.
Let me message Matt Slick real quick. Hey,
Please,
Matt Slick,
Ocean,
having a
no.
reasonable conversation on morality. We want you to ruin it.
What's funny is I was talking to Dr. Malpass a couple weeks ago on that. I said, hey, I was just talking to Matt Slick. He thinks he has a better version of his tag argument, and is a big old long thing on our Facebooks. Come to find out, he hasn't really reformulated his tag argument. And Alex was like, yeah, he hasn't. Matt has not reformulated it.
No shit.
Same old shit. And Alex was like, hey, I'll talk to him on the non sequitur show. Bring him on, right? But my Slick is like, no, it's
I could see Matt Slick like being as far away from the non sequitur show as possible, simply because Kyle's there.
No,
Why?
he'll come on.
If Kyle
Yeah.
flirts with him, he's gonna have a hard time not responding.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And Kyle
'Cause
will.
Kyle's hot, man. Like so, and Matt, I know he's got some temptations he's got to win. That's why
don't know
he's not
about
going to be
that.
on the
Got some
show.
shit he's grappling with. That's okay. Good. I hope he comes to a reconciliation of that.
But I can tell you right now, I think he is a little bit scared of Dr. Malpass because he just shot over his parade.
Oh my God, that was one of the best debates I've ever watched.
Yeah, we're going to be. That's by the way my next hangout, because I did the logical problem. Even people have asked me, "Hey Steve, can you go over your anti-tag argument, the theoretical bullshit?" And Dr. Malpass did again. I'm like, I love to, because I did have that discussion with Slick, and I wish I could have done a little bit better. I got to admit, I did okay, right? I think I did fine, but I look back and go, shit. There are a few things I really wish I would have done different. But now I know I would just kick the shit out of him.
I refuse to encourage you. I think you're going to lose.
Against Matt Slick? Ew, God.
Yeah, I know. God, you know what? Sorry, I take that back. That's too much.
What's next? Ronnie's gonna show me wrong something.
What are you talking about, Steve? Okay, look, we're going to agree at the beginning of this conversation that we're not going to delve into solipsism. And once you back me into a corner, I'm going to move the conversation to solipsism.
You watch the video.
Get my way out.
Do you know what was even funnier than that? What Matt Slick did is when he said to me, "Well, Steve, the logic is that way on paper, but." It's like, what? Wait, what? What does that even
God, Matt.
It's that way on paper, but what, ontologically that's not true? I don't know what the hell that even means. It was bizarre.
Yeah. Like when it comes, like logic exists in mind and on paper, and then it is applied, but that's not that doesn't work the way he's trying to say it.
Yeah, because his understanding of a disjunctive syllogism was all off. But anyways, we're definitely going to do that for my next philosophical hangout if you guys want to be on that, because I thought that was just his tag argument is so bad, it really is. Okay, so moving on here. So it's funny he endorses.
There's a video on my channel of him discussing the tag with me a little bit when it comes to morality as well.
Mine is on Scholar Fiction's channel. If you want to go check it out. It's called P or Not P.
Scholar Fiction, I think, actually did a breakdown of my
P or Not P. Where's Kyle?
Triggered. Yeah, I know. Everybody loves my P. Everybody loves my P and Not P, right?
God damn it!
I don't know, Steve. I'm not a big fan of your P.
I don't know.
Oh God, why does?
No.
It's always about my P.
You're not invited to Waffle House.
I'm not invited to Waffle House.
No longer invited to Waffle House.
But Ocean, I'm the one that invited you to Waffle House. How can you disinvite me?
I'm disinviting you from
our
my
own idea.
That's your plan.
I want to go to Waffle House.
Yeah, but Steve, the difference here though is that for us to get you here for Waffle House would take either a teleporter or a lot of gas. And no amount of burritos I consume will give me enough gas to get you here.
Okay, all right. Why? Oh my!
I think the funny part about that was Shannon's reaction. It's just like, no, all right, no,
no.
Stop it.
I know, Shannon. We can use the teleporter and get you here for Waffle House too, if you want.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
All right, so let's try to see if we can get through this a little more. Hopefully, do have non-sequitur.
I gotta go soon. So
yeah.
I
all right, so let's
take off. All
right, so we're gonna skip the part about where it's weird because he applies to more, appeals to Moore. Moore was a moral realist. He actually accepted moral realism. So it's weird that Cosmic Skeptic is being a moral anti-realist here. So skip. You can read this on your own thing because I know we're running out of time. So here we go. So Cosmic Skeptic doesn't define moral terms for two reasons. One, that the reason that morality cannot be objective is precisely good, bad, or ought can't be defined, and would automatically be agreeing with a certain philosophy. And this is why I haven't defined good, bad, or ought as my definition. So he's saying because these terms can't be defined, then you can't have objective morality. That's really bad, because just because something cannot be defined doesn't mean that it can't be true.
Right.
Because
it's also he's choosing those terms to define that's his definition.
Yes.
Of what's moral. Like he's choosing those terms and then saying they can't be defined. So
wait a minute. We're talking about Cosmic Skeptic, not Jordan Peterson here, right?
Oh Jesus. No, you know what, give him more ground than that.
I'm not trying to compare him to the two, but that is one of the things that when I did my video on Jordan Peterson, that was one of the things that I specifically pointed out, is that you can't use your own special individualistic version of this word and then apply it to everyone else. You have to agree.
We have reached out to Jordan Peterson to get him on. Kyle is going to be a huge Jordan Peterson fan, believe it or not.
He is?
Really?
Yeah, really.
Interesting.
I'm sorry. Me and Kyle are friends now.
I'm not even disagreeing with him. I
says that aren't horrifying.
Yeah, and I definitely get Kyle's position on it. I think that from day one, there's a lot of things Jordan Peterson said initially, I do agree with. Right? I don't think he goes off the rails on everything, but the stuff he does go off the rails on, he goes way the fuck off the rails, right? So
Yes.
So that's the difference, right? But I can't ubiquitously say across the board that Peterson is something I disagree with. No, I think he makes a lot of valid points. I just think he, like for example,
When the crazy begins, the
That's
crazy
when-
doesn't
yeah.
stop.
yeah,
No,
exactly.
you know what? I think if you want to understand Jordan Peterson better, start reading Joseph Campbell.
Don't do this to me, Shannon.
Yeah.
No, I'm not kidding. The Hero with a Thousand Faces is a book by Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell's passed away, but he was.
I know of the book though.
Right. So when I started looking into Joseph Campbell, and I recognized a lot of the archetypal arguments that he's making in Joseph Campbell's work. So I really feel like if you want to understand him, there's a foundation there that is worth delving into. Just saying.
All right, just saying. We'll check it out. So anyways, so Cosmic Skeptic thinks that is there somebody singing?
That's Pam. She's singing.
Oh, okay. I don't mind. So you can do some acapella. Cosmic Skeptic seems to think that by saying that you can't define these things, you're not taking a stance on moral philosophies. And ironically, he actually is. He's actually kind of appealing to more. But the problem is again, Moore is a non-naturalistic person. I mean, I should be a moral non-naturalist. There's a difference. He's obviously a naturalist, but moral non-naturalism is what I subscribe to as well. Moral non-naturalism just basically says I cannot define terms of good in terms of what is natural as far as pleasurable, right? That you can't apply. You can either appeal to naturalism or non-naturalism, hedonism, or what was the other thing that he wrote in his book, Principia. I was just looking at it the other day too. Do you guys remember Moore's book, Principia? Ethicus?
Just start yelling Latin words, Steve. You'll get it.
I think it's Principia Ethicus. Principia Ethica. That's what it is. Principia Ethica. And he breaks the argument that you either have things broken down to naturalistic ethics, hedonism, or metaphysical ethics. So, and I think, obviously when you're dealing with ethics, I think it's a lot more metaphysical than natural. That's why you can't say good is what is pleasurable. That's why Moore called that a naturalistic fallacy. This is some of my understanding. Now, again, if Dr. Malpass ever watches this and cringes and goes, Steve, fucking you suck, you're an idiot, I will respect that. Okay, but that's all I understand. The natural.
But you won't respect it when I say it. What the hell's wrong with you, Jesus?
Yeah, well, no, I do. No, I really do. I mean, I know people that actually know these topics, and when they say, "Hey, Steve, I think you got that wrong," I go, "Oh shit, okay." And I know you guys know these topics really well, so that's why I guys have you in here. So I don't really want to get into the whole William and Craig's argument. I think it's just he says. So why does Dr. Craig feel that atheism can't provide a basis for objective morality? I do think he does kind of take William McCrae a little bit out of a charitable what he's using or what he's saying for his argument, but I don't want to get into that for this particular video. I can just tell you right now that atheists can have objective morality. Atheists can have moral systems. When a theist says you're an atheist, you have no morals. That theist is just stupid. I mean, they have no idea what they're all talking about. If they and a lot of them will say this. I love this. Right, Shannon. They'll say, "Well, Shannon, you could have morals as an atheist, but the only reason you do so is because God allows you to do so, and you're just borrowing from His worldview."
Oh my God! The first video that I did on my channel was a response to a video that said that exact same thing. We're not saying that atheists can't have morals without believing in God. We're just saying that morals exist because God.
Yeah, God wrote it on my heart.
But that's like saying, well, I'm not saying that God created the universe, but the only reason that you exist is because God created the universe. Ergo, transcendental argument, X being a precondition for P, you exist, therefore God exists. That'd be a
that's
transcendental
self-defeating
argument.
them, because if God wrote it on everybody's heart, including atheists, then nobody would engage in any immoral behavior.
Well, we wouldn't need and anytime somebody says that, oh, God is written on everybody's hearts, okay, then why do we need missionaries and why do we have people who don't even have a concept of God? But that's fine.
To remind you of it, because you're just denying it in your unrighteousness.
It's written on my heart, so nobody knows if it's an innate heart.
If you guys ever get a chance, go read or go watch the video. I don't know the name of the channel. I have to remember it, but it's Dr. Kenny Rhodes' channel.
Oh, I love him.
Yeah, I love Kenny. And Kenny, as we people know, is a theologian that we may not always agree with, but he gets a lot of things he is right on.
He's a sweet man, though.
Very nice guy. One of the nice guys you ever want to meet in life.
He's been in contact with me a lot more recently, and I've grown to like him as well.
He's a wonderful dude. But he made a video and he told Christians, stop telling atheists about Romans 1's means blah blah blah, and he broke it down very well. He's like, that's not what it means. God was talking about a specific group of people in I think it was Carthagena in Rome.
I don't know.
But he's like, this was to a group of Jews that fell away. It had nothing to do with the atheists. You're just wrong. And it's one of those things that, again, people, I think, like Sarah, you had mentioned, atheists get so many things stuck in their head, they just parrot it no matter what. Right? And I think that theists do the same thing. They're like, oh, Romans 1 means this. It applies to all atheists. No.
And it's just like when you've got the later passages where Paul is saying that women shouldn't speak in the church. You can look at the context of those passages and see that he's speaking about a very specific scenario. There's a lot of things in the Bible that operate like that. I'm an atheist saying that there are things in the Bible that do not operate the way that atheists parrot.
Yeah, but you have to be honest, though. You still have to be honest, right? Like if you're going to be an atheist, that's a horrible phrasing. But if you're
going to be an atheist,
if you were going to be an atheist, if you're going to be in these public dialogues, especially, and you need to represent yourself honestly. Like, you need to approach things honestly. Otherwise, you're going to get torn apart, and B, like, don't you want to self-scrutinize? Don't you want to hold beliefs that make sense and are open to scrutiny and have held up to scrutiny? If you're going to just be throwing out straw man because you think that you can, I don't know, like, jerk off to how awesome you were at a debate later, then you're an idiot and nobody's going to want to listen to you.
I think that's the whole reason that me and Ocean even became friends. Is he looked at my channel, he's like,
you jerk off about how awesome you were?
That's exactly what I was doing.
I'm telling you, man, Ocean's pretty high on himself. You guys think I'm kidding?
he watched the channel and he was like, Sirs is wrong about all this. Let me just jerk off about how awesome I am.
Fair enough. I figured.
Damn it, Ocean.
I knew it.
You're such a narcissist. Okay, so let's kind of wrap this up.
That was going to be a good story too. Oh well.
On atheist morality. So look at you can appeal to a couple different things. Look at and Shannon appeals to moral subjectivism. There are moral truths, but they're dependent upon human minds for existence. You said you're a subjectivist, right? Mm-hmm. So you think there are moral truths, but they're all contingent upon the mind or independent mind.
Yeah, yes, I think that we determine what's morally true.
Okay, so there are moral truths, but they're basically all contingent on the mind. But Morian non-naturalistic is that there are moral truths and there are objective non-natural truths. I lend more to this one. I don't think all moral truths have dependent on mind any more than 1 + 1 = 2 dependent upon the mind. I think there are moral facts. All right, so let's kind of keep going here. I know we're running out of time.
Yeah, I gotta go.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Real quick. So this is what it all boils down to on subjectivism. If you think X is wrong and I think X is right, we cannot explain that as a case as one being mistaken. Each of us is just reporting our own individual opinion. Like saying I like X, I do not like X. This doesn't count as a case of disagreement and cannot be explained by one of us making a mistake. It is deeply disanalogous to mathematics. So in this particular case, look, anybody can say I think this is right, I think this is wrong. But the objectivist would say, moral objectivist would say, look, whether you think it's right or wrong, there are moral facts that exist that are true. That's the difference. So, anyways, it's kind of. But again, this goes to the belief and the belief content. That again, the content of the belief is true or false, regardless if somebody thinks they're true or false, right? So that's why I have a problem with subjectivism. Sure, people can believe that X is true or not true. But the content itself, I think, is true regardless of your belief. That's my opinion.
What do you mean by content in this situation?
Well, again, I think I will use the mathematical analogy. 1 + 1 = 2. Mm-hmm. I could say I believe that's wrong.
Answer. Moral questions don't have a definite.
And that's a good point, right?
So it's a false analogy.
Well,
saying 1 + 1 = 2. Yeah, of fucking course, 1 + 1 = 2. But can you say stealing is wrong or you ought not steal?
Well, that's where the analogy does fail.
Think of a scenario where perhaps it's plausible that it's better to, like, a Robin Hood type scenario.
But it is true that the proposition is true regardless of your belief. That's all I'm saying. Now you're right. You make a great point. Obviously,
what proposition is true? That you ought not steal?
Well, no, just a moral fact. Any moral fact. I think there can be moral facts.
I don't know that there's necessarily a moral fact.
Well,
What's
okay.
a moral fact? Give me an example of a moral fact that isn't contextual.
Well, all moral facts are based on odds in some ways.
Okay,
right?
well then, but they can all be subverted by a contextual scenario.
But that doesn't matter. But that not
then
really.
they're not. Then how are they objective?
Because
then how are they facts? If contextually,
what is a fact?
They can be derailed.
I mean,
oh my God, Jesus Christ! What is
what
existence?
Is
are you fucking real?
There's something. Hang on. There's something called the queerness argument, right? Argument for queerness. That you're right. Moral facts are different from empirical facts, right? That's why I think Cosmic Skeptic again gets it wrong. He wants to talk about objectivity being demonstrable, and that's not what it means. A moral fact, again, if I say, look, if I take the Sam Harris approach and I say harms and benefits, and I say there's a child that's burning her hand in a fire, and you want to reduce harm, you ought to remove her hand from the fire. Now, somebody can say, well, I'm teaching her a lesson. Okay, that's fine. But it has nothing to do with the ought. It has nothing to do with the fact that you ought to remove her hand, and you're moral to not to if you don't do so because you're causing harm to her. And if your goal is to prevent harm, then that is objectively a moral.
Well, in that scenario, she's potentially causing harm to herself. And so you're morally obligated to prevent her from causing harm to herself.
That's a fact. Then you're So
okay. So anytime somebody's going to cause harm to themselves, you have to be able to extend these things out. They need to extrapolate.
That's a moral fact, though. You just appeal to objective morality.
Okay, so it's a moral fact that if somebody's going to cause themselves harm, you are obligated. You ought to intervene. That's what you're laying out there. If somebody's about to cause themselves harm, you ought to intervene. Okay.
I don't think it's an obligation.
Then how do you define harm in that scenario? I've pierced my ears. That hurt me. Should somebody have stopped me from doing? I have tattoos. That hurt. Should somebody have?
No, I don't think so. I don't think you have. No. I don't think you have a moral obligation at all. That's the whole point. You don't.
This doesn't extrapolate out there.
You did the same thing. Well, hang on. You did the same thing.
That just means you're a biblical deviant.
You did the same thing Cosmic Skeptic did. You just moved from moral values to moral obligations, moral duties. That's the same thing that Cosmic Skeptic did, and that's.
So I want to make a point in favor of like contextual facts, real quick. But
yes, please go ahead, Ocean, and then I gotta go.
Okay.
A contextual fact would be, for example, that like water is a liquid, but that's a contextual fact, depending on the temperature around it.
Sure.
Does that make sense? And then you could extrapolate the same thing from moral facts that stealing is wrong in one situation, it may not be wrong in another situation based on the temperature or context of the surrounding facts regarding why you're stealing and the intention behind it.
But water has properties that are always clearly defined. Like you can always, in every scenario, you can predict what's going to happen based on the temperature and elevation, right? With water.
Right.
You can't really do that with stealing. There's more ambiguity.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand the analogy. I really do.
I agree.
That's a solid analogy, and that's something that I'm gonna have to think about because it can exist in different states. That doesn't mean.
All right. No, I agree.
It doesn't exist
like
objectively.
Stealing is objectively one thing, but
so you have to look
as far as like definition goes,
existing in different states based on context, but there's still an objective fact that.
Right. Well, the objective fact about whether or not stealing is wrong would change, just like the state of water being liquid. Like just like water is liquid in one state, it can be not liquid in another state. Just like stealing is immoral in one state, it can be not. It can be not
but
immoral
in
another
maintains
state.
Its chemical.
Well, I think
constitution.
Well, hang on. I think the easy way of seeing it. Look, if you don't want to put undue burden on someone else, then you ought not steal, right? Because stealing affects somebody else, right? You're taking their property. So if the goal, if you're defining stealing as reducing harm to other people, right, because you're inflicting undue hardship on them, that's an objective moral fact. That's how.
But what if what you're stealing was stolen, like in the Robin Hood scenario? What, like somebody stole a bunch of stuff from everybody, and you're going and they're hoarding it. You can't get it, and you're going to steal it to redistribute it.
You're just giving up. No, you just changed it to an entirely different content, though. Stealing,
but it's still stealing.
But it's still an objective moral fact that stealing affects other people, right?
So you're still affecting the person that stole.
You didn't. Well.
But morally, that's not okay.
Well, that actually goes. I hate to say it, but that actually kind of goes into normative ethical theories of for being virtuous and stealing. Is stealing virtuous for stealing for like the Robin Hood type thing? I think that goes into normative. We're talking about meta ethics, and so I think we're gonna. I don't want to change topics too much, but anyways, we do got to wrap this. Let me wrap this. But you make great points, Shannon. By the way, let me just. I think it all boils down to this: the idea that all morality is subjective because all decision making involves a subjective element is guilty of conflating belief with the content of the belief. And I think that's the biggest takeaway from Cosmic Skeptic's argument is that he says everything that has to do with decision making is objective, therefore there can be no objective morality. That's like saying, well, all thought is subjective, therefore there cannot be mathematical objective facts. No, it's just it's called subjective reductionism. It's a very bad argument, and I think Cosmic Skeptic is just fundamentally wrong across the board on this video. But anyways, you guys want to get your last sentence in? Shannon,
Sure.
you got to go, so why don't you go now?
I do. Sorry.
Steve, you're stupid, and I'm going to yell at you more.
Thank you, Daddy.
I second what Ocean just said.
Thank you, Mommy.
Does it work if all three of us agree?
I can't call Shannon Mommy. She's like a bigger sister.
Right.
What little sister?
Little sister, Steve. Little sister. Well, I do want to kind of plug something. I usually don't plug stuff, but I'd like to plug a thing. I'm having the Women of Deconversion on my channel on Thursday evening. They're from the Secular Hangouts.
Oh, cool.
And I'm really excited to have a chat with all female deconverted atheists about, some issues that aren't specific to women, but it's nice to hear, some more women voices, coming out. So I'm hosting them on my channel on Thursday night. If anybody's interested, it'll be fun.
Awesome. I'm gonna have a hangout that night with just men and call it just men hanging out being sexist.
Do it. We're having a cocktail party. You have your incel hangout. That's fine.
Exactly. By the way, say hi to Courtney for me. I really think.
Yeah, Courtney will be there.
Right. She's awesome. Yeah, she's gonna be on. We're trying to get her on non-sec and on this channel. She's really
sure she
amazing.
can.
Oh yeah, I know she will. Yeah, I talked to her quite frequently. Courtney's amazing. It's just timing stuff. But anyways, okay. Cirrus, you want to
I'd say I think I already said most of what I wanted to say earlier on. There's nothing I really want to plug right now as far as any other videos that are coming up. My only thing would be I want specifically Cosmic Skeptic and definitely the atheist community at large to not look, and I say community very loosely, mind you, but to not look at issues of morality as black or white, as subjectivism or objectivism. There's a metric ass ton of literature on the topics, and I think it would really behoove many people on both sides to just read that literature.
I agree. Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of literature out there. I mean, I've been reading Nagel lately and more obviously, and not reading the guy more. But I'm finding that unless you actually go to literature, Wikipedia only makes so much sense, right? I'm never going to learn philosophy. You're never going to learn philosophy off Wikipedia. I'm sorry, it's just not going to happen. I use it for quick reference, but I go to Google Books, and even then, it's really freaking hard. But I'm enjoying it. I'm actually reading things that I never knew about. So, anyways, Ocean.
Oh, I already said what I wanted to say by yelling at you.
Screw Steve's
guys.
promotion.
I think so. We'll see you on the next Sequitur show. I believe it's at 5 or 5:30 today. I don't remember. I don't know if we're going to run late. We're doing pyramids again. So
I can say that liking Steve is an amoral position because as he doesn't exist, it doesn't matter.
yeah. So just do it anyways because it doesn't matter.